David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Greg.
What excites you about Australia's business society and opportunities at the moment?
Yeah, the opportunities are profound.
Yep.
We've always been great at innovation, and what we do, and we do very, very well. What we've got to do is a lot more of that, and we've got to create the environment, government environment, business environment, where innovation can be capitalised on.
Yeah.
And we've got to let it flow.
Is environment there at all? You say create the environment. Okay, that's fine. We've all heard those words before. But how do we create it, David?
Yeah. Well, the frameworks need to be stronger than they are to attract investment and to give people the freedom to go and start businesses and generate wealth and for that to be admired within society. I mean, we can't keep playing the welfare game forever. This is a Western democracy big issue where Western democracies have got on the kick of saying, well, look, we get votes by doing certain things. And by the way, this is not about one party or another. And what we have to do is we have to think through, well, what is our real responsibility to the future generations of this country? And we have to be thinking about how do we unleash them to be the best that they can be. So that is about creating confidence in the environment. It's about creating rules that people can understand. It's about giving people hope for better things for the future.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about unleashing them. Are they up for the game?
Yes,
Are they?
Totally. I mean, what will happen
haven't we gone far and far left in the last 20 years? I look at Australia, we're borderline socialists.
There is many aspects that if you tell somebody they can't do something, or if you tell somebody that I will just give you something, they will say, they're very logical, they'll say, I'll take it. However, if you say, if you do this and we give you this education and we give you this opportunity and here's what can happen, then talent is unleashed.
Okay.
We need to unleash talent.
All right. It starts at education, I assume.
Correct.
Okay. Building blocks.
Building blocks, exactly. And
Big problems there.
There's a lot to work through, but I mean, we can't sit back and say, well, what's the answer? And I mean, I'm not in the business of framing the answers for the future, but what I can do is
but you are in the business of hiring what comes out of that. So what are you seeing going through at the moment?
There is top talent everywhere that you can hire. So working with good firms, working with people who have ambition, but working with people who value the trip towards mastery. That's the secret of the game, is encouraging mastery. And if we go back through history, every great foundation was built on aspiration and approaching mastery. If you tell people you don't have to be a master, I'll just give it to you, then what's going to happen? People are going to say, I'll take it. But if you then value within your society mastery, then what happens? We get better. Look at Australia in sport. Look at Australia in science. We're Richard Robson. Nobel Prize.
Yeah, and there's a price to pay to get to mastery, right?
There is a price to pay, and it's called discipline, and that is worth it. It's a price worth paying, and I think people, when they have the opportunity to actually be good at something and understand the value that comes, the beauty that comes from getting closer to mastery, guess what? They start enjoying that journey and investing in the way necessary to achieve it.
Look, I'm a really proud Australian, and I love my country. I had the opportunity to be overseas like you've done, and you come back. It just seems to me, you're right, there are a few masters out there, not enough is encouraged, and we're performing way below what the potential could be to play. We don't talk it up as a nation. Leadership from the lens of looking at the government is light. Wanting to be a master, wanting to pay the price, wanting to take it on. Do you see that as part of the DNA?
I do. I actually I do think it's inherent within the DNA of every human and every society. At different times throughout history, there are frameworks where it's better and more admired. And right now, you'd say there's not much that's going on that is actually encouraging that kind of thinking, but it's still happening. So I think let's not be focused on the negative about how bad everything is. Let's focus on what we can do in terms of the positive. Let's go back to high-quality policy. Let's go back to long-run policy. We've got a track record of fabulous policy. Super is a great example.
Long time ago.
That's okay. It's recent history in the long history arc of history, right?
Yeah, sure.
And we've got all the capability to bring back some really good policy for the future. And I would say retirement incomes is one of those examples where as the policy shifts from accumulation to decumulation, we've got the opportunity to shape a fantastic enabler of capital that can then enable, enterprise to grow within this country. People will naturally aspire to do things. And so we've got to just start to think about the things that allow that to happen. Policy's a good starting point. Education's a good starting point. I'm focused on the positive. We're running great businesses here. I'm very proud of the businesses I'm associated with. I see the extraordinary. We've got 600 members in AmCham in US Australian businesses. They're not just US Australia. They're Asian businesses. They're UK businesses. There's a lot of energy going on in the innovation world out there. I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future.
Okay. Where's the capital in the world at the moment? Is it actually coming in here?
Yeah, the capital's flowing. A little less right now. Obviously there's been some challenges around, environmental approvals. There's been some mixed messages sent about how the ATO might, tax, foreign entities in the country. And so all of these kind of things are negative signals to capital. But capital will figure out, is there a big opportunity here and should we continue to back that? And the US is a huge source of capital for Australia. It'll continue to be for a long time. And despite the focus on China from a trade point of view, as an investor, they're tiny, absolutely tiny compared to North America. So when we start to think about where we've got natural alignment about the preconditions for creating that, objective of moving towards mastery, we start to look at the US as being really, really strongly aligned with Australia.
We'll talk about policy there.
Well,
I don't think we're playing that card with the US too well at the moment. I think we're completely misaligned in terms of policy.
Look, the two governments are very different, but let's look at the fabric that exists.
Going back for a long period of time, yes.
I'm saying right now,
Okay.
if you look at it day to day, the fabric between the two countries is profoundly strong. Strong. And it's strong at every level. And this has been building for a long time. But if you look at investment, if you look at innovation partnerships between Australia and the US are more than any other country by double more. And so any other region by double more. So when you start to look at the fabric that exists between us, the defence fabric is very strong, incredibly strong.
Are we playing that game smart, are we?
Well, all I'm saying is two governments have got I've never had a bigger divide in terms of ideology, no question about that. And that's what they have to be accountable for that. But on the things where we do have alignment and long-term alignment, which is really the freedom of democracy and its value, the freedom of innovation, the enterprise and what goes on in terms of capital and enterprise coming together to create value, science, technology, innovation, so many good things to build on. So I think we get a lot focused on the differences.
All right, yeah, I agree with that. Okay, there's a thing called an economy which we need to grow, pretty quickly. It's got to be done a little bit smarter than sometimes just relying heavily on immigration. Comes down to your ideas about showing some initiative, about innovation, the words you've just used. But if I look at, for example, the big thing which drives economic growth, energy. Yeah, and then we're going to talk about data centers. Then we're going to talk about the speed of AI coming through, et cetera, et cetera. Then we look at the United States. As we both saw last night in our discussion we had the opportunity to go to last night, what the Americans are doing, we're moving at snail pace in this country compared to them. So that's what I'm worried about. Are we missing something here? Or are we having the proper conversation, David?
So there's a lot of ways you can look at these challenges. Of course, the AI thing is front and center for everybody. All the companies I'm associated with it, whether it's Apollo Global Management or it's Ventia, and many, if not all, of the companies that are members of the AmCham are all focused on AI in some form. It's happening. The governments are naturally a little bit reticent, and particularly our government here, to say, well, we don't know about the balance of risks. Inherently cautious, you could say. Maybe too cautious. But it's not stopping businesses from investing in AI, from testing things, from using it within their everyday business. There's no barriers to people to stop it. We have got to harness the US massive capital spend, trillions in going into that sector. And that is where Australia, as a curator of technology, can be a superstar. we should be looking at it going, we don't have to spend all that money. All we have to do is go over there and borrow it and bring it back here and apply it. And if you look again back through our business success stories, that's what we've done. We've curated and then we've sent it back and we've sent it to the world. So again, I remain inherently optimistic that the business capability that we have in this country is profoundly good. Of course, there are challenges. I'm not denying those.
So out of 10, where are we travelling at, Dave? We call it a spade a spade. I know you're going to give me the glass half full, and that's fine. I'm that way as well. But also, I speak to chief execs every day, David.
Sure.
So the tax, the movement of government, slow. The mixed messages of government, unbelievable. The mining sector being beaten up every day of the week. The energy sector, no one's got a clue with the cost of energy. Manufacturing sector getting crushed. And you're telling me that all things are rosy here.
No. What I'm telling you is we've got some preconditions that if we can harness them, we can turn that around. What I'm saying is
we've got Australian people who can do something, right?
So that's the alignment point. Now, when you start, I'm not going to go through that long list of challenges, and they're very bad.
Right.
You know.
So what should we focus on then?
Well, I come back to let's start with some good policy things. Let's give ourselves a few things that we really need to worry about. Right. Sovereignty.
Yes.
Let's focus on AUKUS. Now, AUKUS is not just about defence. It's not just about submarines. It's about advanced capabilities. Yep. Let's really invest in that as a nation and make the case for it. I think the politicians do have to make a case for it.
Is the SMEs going to win in AUKUS, or is it going to be the primes?
The primes will obviously do well, but only if they can innovate at a much faster rate than they are doing, because the rate of change favours SMEs. SMEs are in the box seat, and Australian SMEs particularly, but they've got to get marrying up with capital as well. And right now, there are many examples of the US Defence Intelligence Unit financing Australian small enterprises and giving them a start when our own Defence Department maybe is constrained by capital and therefore is saying, look, I can't do it, or we can't give you scale.
Constrained by capital, like the budget maybe.
Well, like a budget, sure. But we've got to get the budget from somewhere, right?
Yep.
So you've got to make the case to the Australian people that this matters. Yep. So let's start there. Let's go back to retirement incomes. Great policy area. Could free up enormous amounts of capital to be invested in our own economy, but of course diversification, because it's about setting up for retirees to actually value something they don't at the moment. Instead of a lump sum, it's got to be about retirement income. They've got to be thinking about income flows into the future and saying, you know what, we value the fact that we can actually live and we don't have to be afraid of longevity risk, and we can now then take that capital, get some form of a guarantee for it, you know, in terms of guaranteed income, indexed to things that worry us, healthcare, you know, inflation, you know, things, education costs, things that matter. So if you address those policy areas, they're not big shifts, Greg. This would be my point.
Well, they're not big shifts, but we let them slip somewhat, have we not?
These are hard areas. I mean,
education, how's that hard? When we were up there at one stage, we're now down here in the OECD.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that we have to go back and address the fundamentals there. You can see that shift is happening. There's been a long run. I
can see the talk is happening. I can see the talk is happening. You reckon it's going
well,
up?
Look, I've got teachers in the family, right?
Yep.
Mate, we've got a primary school teacher in you know, one of my wife's eldest daughter, and we've got a Latin and classics teacher in son number 3, about to be married. Very proud of that.
Teaching Latin.
And he's teaching Latin.
Yeah, well.
And he's teaching classics.
Okay.
So, you know, I see and hear that conversation, and you know, he's excited about the future. The kids are excited. Again, there's obviously a lot of things that we can look at and say, if only we could do them better. But we've got to start with some building blocks. And I go back to, let's protect our sovereignty. Let's think about where capital is going to come from and how we could amass it very well.
Yep.
Let's think about giving our populace confidence about the future of their retirement income so they can live with some degree of confidence. Let's support welfare. We do need to do that. But let's think about better policy around NDIS, and are we absolutely spending all that money as well as we could? Just go back to some basics there, because if you think about the big impacts on the budget, these are them. Once you've got that sorted out, you can come back to things that we can do at the edges, where you can perhaps invest in different elements of innovation or manufacturing to achieve certain outcomes. But if you start the other way round, you don't know what you're going to end up with, and all you're going to end up with is more promises than you can afford.
Best and said for the last few years that the American government had a problem. It's called a spending problem, right? They could raise revenues, they have a spending problem. Do we have the same here?
Certainly we do. If you look at the cost of where everything is at the moment and where it's going to go and the escalations that are occurring, there is a reckoning point out here.
Yep.
And that reckoning point is responsible for all politicians, all government and business as well, which is to start acting for the entire tribe, not just your tribe back here.
Both sides of the house.
Both sides of the house.
Yeah,
this is a political system problem, Greg, in the world today.
Yep.
And it's a Western problem.
Yeah, agreed.
And we're missing some big near-term risks that I might think that we should talk about at some stage in the conversation. But what we've got to do is step back and go, if we can get and hold our political class more accountable for the whole tribe, not just getting their tribe what they want, we're all going to be better off.
Yep.
Come back to policy, policy that has genuine public sector input, that is not biased by politics to such an extent that it gets corrupted. There are a few things that we could do to move to better.
What do the Americans want, or what do the investors from offshore want?
Yes. Every investor wants a degree of certainty, and they want to know that the rules are not going to get changed halfway down the track. We're sending very mixed messages on this at the moment, on every front. So that should be very plain to understand. And if you're a business person, it is. If you're not a business person, it's harder to understand. You say, but we've always had money and we've got this super sector and there's a big pot of money there and surely that solves it. If you don't understand the dynamics of where capital comes from and what it wants and how quickly it can move, then you're not necessarily going to set up the preconditions for a success.
Yeah, and capital it might come, but it also goes very quickly.
Yeah.
It's got to get past Singapore to get here.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're going to be on your way to Melbourne.
Yes.
Great state.
Well, Melbourne's got...
Look at the message that's sending out to the country.
Sure. And I think it's a very good example of sending negative messages about
businesses are left, right and centre looking to pack up potentially and leave.
Well, I listen to the radio too and hear the conversations. I see what's happening with the state in terms of crime and these other elements. Yeah. It is very concerning, taxes, etc. And it should be, let's go back to the fundamentals.
Well, also overstepping the mark too and advising that I got my own company, I'm running my own business. You're going to tell me the people can work from home. That's my business.
They're elected. So
no, you're not elected to run my company.
No, that's true. But the point is, the government in this system, they're elected and they make those policies.
Yep.
Those policies are getting plenty of airtime about the faults with them and how they're not right.
Yep.
And you would hope that if you were having a broader lens, which is acting for the whole tribe and saying, hold on, this is probably not going to win.
Hold it. There's an opportunity that they may get re-elected. Now, why would that be the case based on anyone's common sense? Go on, why?
Somebody will vote for them.
And why would they vote for them? Going back to your early point, rather than go and get a gig, I might get a handout. I might get support in that regard.
Correct.
I'm not going to get up and have a real crack.
Correct. So until...
That's the problem, which is why I'm worried about our society.
Well, we should be worried because we want for better, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, we can't be panicked by this, nor can we ignore the fact that we've got a set of rules and a system that works. So I personally...
You can't let it sit there for too long, David.
No, I say let's come up with an alternative. Greg, let's come up with an alternative.
Right, so what is
the alternative is let's come up with a better set of policies that can be put in front of people that they can genuinely consider. Let's get some people who can communicate those to the electorate at large, and let's have the electorate be enough interested in that outcome to actually vote for them. Now, that is the system.
Do you think the electorate, or do you think the Australian public in general is interested in politics today?
They're smarter than you think. And
that's what Richard would say. Yep.
They're smarter than you think. And whenever things get really out of whack, there's a change. And don't assume that if you've got a big majority, it's going to sustain. We've seen that happen so many times. Here and in other countries. We've seen surprise election results. Don't underestimate the smarts of the populace. And in my judgment, they will take it for as long as they can. It's a balance. They'll say, yes, I'll take a little bit more. Actually, I'm now worried about what it means for my kids and my grandkids. I don't think I should do that anymore. They may not tell you they're going to do that. Give them some credit. So let's go back to saying the system will put some natural guardrails around it. I personally don't waste my time or energy railing against a particular element or sub-element of that. What I try to look for is the building blocks for future success and say, I want to be optimistic about the future. I mean, I don't get up telling my kids that everything's buggered.
No,
Or my grandkids.
No.
No.
But you don't get up, what did you say? You want to be a master, not a half master.
Correct. So I say, let's get up and improve what we can improve.
Yeah.
Let's take little steps towards great things.
Okay. Speaking of little steps, or maybe fast, big steps in the United States. You must be seeing that every day of the week. Now, we all, whether you like him, loathe him, et cetera, Mr. Trump has certainly turned that nation around.
He's taking on some very big issues, and he's doing exactly what he said he would. So he said on the campaign trail, if you want any doubt about the roadmap, just go back to the campaign trail. He said what he would deal with would be immigration. He said he needed to turn around a budget deficit and permanent thinking about spending more than they could afford. Yeah. And he's taken action to do that. Yep. Now, whether, again, you like him or you don't like him is not relevant. He is the president, and he has the administration that is focused on a set of policy outcomes that he promised the electorate and they voted for. So he's now delivering on those in the way he said. And that's quite confronting for the world that was used to looking at it another way. But again, in all of history, I don't know about you, you know your family history. My family history goes back a long, long way. You know, we've only lived in 3 places, Australia, Cornwall and Moffatt in Scotland. And when I go back, we had to adapt to all sorts of things, you know, pestilence, genocide, all sorts of things along the way, wars, all economic hardship, everything, health, other things, whatever. We had to adjust. You have to adapt. It's a new world and it's not changing. Tariffs will be here. I think you should assume that tariffs...
And he's using them in different ways. For example, he's changing wars as a result of using tariffs. Well, I mean, it's not just simply just putting up a tariff for the hell of it.
Yeah. So, again, it's just looking at it and saying, all right, the world has changed. He has the leadership position. He has the mandate from his country. Now, people would say, well, it's not enough and all the rest of it. Well, he's got it, right? And that's the system.
But is the country buzzing?
How much energy is there going? Have you been there?
Not lately, but I'm seeing people every day of the week telling me every time they come back,
energy.
The place is on. Okay,
energy.
The people may be a little bit split, but people who might have voted for Hillary many years ago left happily, may not necessarily like Mr. Trump, but they actually support what he's trying to do in terms of turn the country around, get employment up, inflation down, and bring in capital. Yeah.
So when you go there, most people, even the education sector, you know, here's a little anecdote. Somebody from the Australian education sector, very senior, visited and participated in a conference in the US. When they got there, they thought it would be a rail against Trump. When they got there, the conversation was, well, he's probably right on some things. We've gone a bit far over here. We better get on with it and deal with the situation that is. So now how do we start adding value to the system? That's the mindset shift, which is when the education system goes, all right, well, we played that game for as much as it was worth and perhaps we overplayed it. Now let's start to settle back to what's the new reality and get on with it. That's what we have to do.
Talk about energy over there, what he's done there in terms of energy and where the country's going.
Well, energy security has to be one of the most fundamental things for any economy. And here in Australia, when we look at where we are spending our time on, matters that people are concerned about and should be concerned about, climate change, these kind of things, and the current ESG framework, if you're a business, energy security, and geopolitics are the new ESG. And this is where we need to be thinking that the near-term risks that we face are much more multiplier effect to the negative than the longer-term risks. We've got to pay attention to the long-term risks. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't. But when you look at what we've done, we've gone like this on some very long-term risks. And then you turn around and you say, what's happening every day? Energy security, and the administration is addressing that very, very quickly. And that's a very good thing. And we've got some challenges here with decades of energy policy that has not been as clear as it could be or should be, driven by politics. Energy security matters. We better get on to that. Number two, security.
So your definition of energy security is what?
Your capacity to basically continue to fuel your own economy in a way that is actually not going to be disrupted by, short-term changes in either technology or other disruptions, third-party disruptions.
So where are we there?
Well, you asked the question about the US.
Do you understand what we're doing here in this country?
Well, I've got a point of view that I'm observing what's happening,
Right.
and I think energy security should be a much higher
Priority. Yeah,
right? So, again, I'm not trying to say I'm not setting the policy. I'm just saying if you are really concerned and you're looking at long-term risk, come a little shorter and say what could get you very quickly. Energy security is one.
Okay.
Number two, just security.
Yep.
With the advent of AI, it's cross-border, and there are nation states that don't think the same way we are.
No.
They are looking at us and saying, gee, I think we might, take advantage of that. You've seen many examples of ransomware. That's the tip of the iceberg. The real issue is actually much broader than that, and it's a big deal. And that is that if there is some kind of escalation driven by geopolitics, doesn't even have to be related to Australia, just a mistake in the region. Those two frigates that were sailing up in the South China Sea got, buzzed by the PLA. If one of those young lads that was commanding one of those things made a mistake, what could have happened? Geopolitics is a near-term risk. There's things happening every day. And I'm going somewhere with this, which is when we start to look at where we are focused, we often miss risk. And we've got to come back and say, as businesses today, have you got your business continuity plans set and ready for the changing risk environment that we could face much faster than where we're spending a lot of time, which is climate governance reporting for companies? And look, that's fine. That's an important risk to be considered. And there are other things in social value add that you can measure and mark, that you can share with your communities. And, these are very important matters. But then you come back to what's going to get you: energy security where there's a third-party intervention of some kind into our operational infrastructure. AI is going to be an accelerant on that risk. And geopolitics, stuff we cannot control that we could get swept up in. Is business ready? Is business ready for those risks? And are they thinking about the true risk and integrated supply chain? Is government ready to be able to have the conversation in a mature way with business to say, how would we keep our citizens safe? How would we continue supply? How would we actually, what would be our series of priorities? I'm sure there are, people who are thinking about this in government and defence. But I think business probably needs to look at some of those risks and give it a little bit more attention.
Well, what should business be doing?
Well, in my judgment, they'd be looking at those things and asking a lot more on the scenario planning. It isn't saying, how are we going to deal with a ransomware attack? It's actually far more complicated than that. It's how will we sustain operations? How will we keep our workforces safe in the event that these risks materialise? How will we continue to deliver services to the economy and continue to employ people? These are complex questions, Greg, and I think, there's, when it comes to risk, I think about these things. I don't obsess about them.
Well, just on that. Okay, so risk. You said employ people. Based on the information you're receiving and seeing in the US and the potential impact of AI, and we've heard what Elon Musk has said, what do you see the actual unemployment potential number getting, or are we going to create another new form of people being employed as new technology does come along, or is this going to be quite substantial?
It's going to have an impact, and it's going to have an impact in some areas. But where it won't have an impact, for example, is empathy. So go back to education. If you think about that, very difficult to AI education, very difficult. If you think about medical intervention. There's all sorts of examples where you can use the technology, but you still need judgment across it.
Yeah.
It's a supplementary tool that we have to be alert to the risks of what it could do. But again, I don't catastrophize. That's just not my modus operandi. And it is to say AI is something that we should be thoughtful about, but we can't regulate it cross-border. And when you're a nation state, you look at it and you say, well, how can we protect ourselves? You can only do so much within your borders. AI does have a lot of cross-border risk.
Absolutely does.
More conversation about that would be good. Now, maybe these conversations are taking place and I'm just not aware of them. So I think when we look at AI, we should be thinking, how do we harness its potential? Every business should be doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm doing it in our businesses, not me, but the people who actually run the businesses, they're passionate about it. Yeah. And it's coming into everything we do. Is it stopping us from employing people? No, not at all. But what are we doing?
Well, it'll change.
Yeah, no,
where you employ your people.
It is actually enhancing.
There'll be a volume number here.
It's enhancing a lot of jobs. So the approach we've taken is to say, ask our frontline people, how can you use AI to improve your job? Because if we can do our job and you can do your job better, so you're spending less time on things you don't really enjoy doing and would be better done with someone else, then I can go back to my clients and say, over time, I can give you a long-run, lower cost of service delivery. Yep. So that's just one example of one company doing it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean I have to sack people or that people have to go. Those kind of things happen in some sectors and some industries. In the industries that I'm in, that's not what's happening. It's actually being used to productively analyse data, get better outcomes, lower long-run economic costs to our clients, give better outcomes for our employees and the people who work for us in our service contractors, etc. So, again, I don't catastrophize and say what could happen. I say what is happening and how do we harness this?
Risk. I'm sitting in the US. I've got a large amount of capital. I'm going to invest in the country.
Yeah.
I look at Asia, all parts of Asia, which is coming on like no tomorrow. I look at Australia, solid base, Western civilization, reasonably good education, smart people. Let's just check the productivity levels there. So I'm going to think about that actually now. Bang for my buck. That's a big risk.
All capital will get to the detail. They will look at the macro, but in time it will come down to the very specific investment opportunity.
Yeah, right.
Is it supporting an energy transition for an energy company? Now that is a very specific set of, challenges that you have to go through, and you've got to get into the detail to really understand the risk. And oftentimes when we look at macro risk, and per the earlier part of the conversation, you've then got to go to the next level of, okay, what does that actually mean and what do you do about it? Capital is very rational. There is capital coming to this country today, and it is coming and investing in all sorts of areas. And in Apollo, we're supporting the non-bank financial sector. We're investing capital there. We are working on the future of retirement incomes and thinking about how our global balance sheets can support long-dated product for retirees in Australia that don't exist today. Those kind of opportunities are very big opportunities. So I think that people are going to continue to look at the markets and they're going to continue to say, when I get through all the noise, I'm going to see, is that going to work or not work?
Yeah, but what are the growth markets in Australia? You're talking I hear what you're saying there, but 5 years, 10 years down the track.
Yeah,
what are we going to be the masters of? We've been digging holes out of the ground for a very, very long time. We've been good at that. We're very good at that.
In fact, we're world best practice at
Absolutely.
That. Yeah.
Okay, but coal's diminishing. So that's going to hit the budget. That's going to hit all our incomes. So what else are we going to do?
Well, if you focus on the preconditions that encourage capital and enterprise to get together,
yes,
we don't know what those industries are going to be. But the innovation, I back Australian innovation. I back SMEs. And
SMEs are going to the wall at the moment, David.
Yes. Look, Greg, you've got
to call out what's happening.
Fine. So go back to the preconditions, which is what's not right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and then then start to address those.
Right.
And again, you and I can have an opinion, but it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. We don't matter that much. We can have an opinion. What we've got to do is, if we're really serious about it, is go and work with government, work with the public service, work with the opposition, and in a truly egalitarian, even way, contribute to the policy debate. It takes a lot of courage to do that when people are going like this.
Yeah, agreed.
If you go red team, blue team, you're going to lose.
Yeah, agreed.
Right? Go back to the basics. The basics of every organism in history has advanced because of cooperation.
Yep.
Somehow you've got to get some preconditions back to cooperation. If you do the wrong thing by me, I've got to do something about it straight away. Yeah. But I should go back to cooperating. Game theory 101. Yeah, but I should be clear about what I do. Yeah, we're a long way from that at the moment. So if you'd like, a big macro roadmap, let's get to that.
Yeah, well, I'm not, but but you're a senior business person. You've been around the world. Okay, but let's just stand back for a sec. 2050, all right? We may not be here, but what will Australia be known for?
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be famous for.
Can you see any vision about it? Discussion about it?
And the
future planning about it?
The question is, do we need some macro vision that's going to take us there, or do we need the preconditions where 1,000 flowers bloom? I'm a big fan of 1,000 flowers blooming. Okay. So remove the impediments as much as you can.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah?
Yep.
Address things that could make a difference to allowing people to win. Let's make sure that capital is actually flowing in all sorts of ways so that enterprise can get that. Let's make sure that impediments to those things are not there. Let's not have an island mentality. Let's have an outward mentality. We're connected to a global world and our markets are global. Let's think about those kind of things. And, if you want to come back to some of the philosophical differences of the US administration at the moment versus the Australian government, you've got a big difference. One's for big government and involved in everything, and the other one's for smaller government and facilitating. 1,000 flowers blooming. So back to your point, when you walk around Australia, do you get this sense of energy because the government's going to look after me? Or when you go to the US, do you get this sense of energy because, guess what, I better get on with it. I've got to own my own future. Yep. So sooner or later, that philosophical point of view will become apparent to people, and Australia's got good preconditions to be able to take advantage of that.
Where's Europe? Outside of Poland, which is doing well. Where's Europe?
Yeah. Well, again, they've got many things to deal with, and the first thing is they've got to spend a bit more on defence. And, President Trump has helped with that, encouraging them in that direction, i.e. they have to own their own problems and their own challenges. So when you look at it, there is a lot of things where the pendulum went the wrong way for too long. And I think the populace is starting to see it, and hence you're getting some random outcomes. I hope that doesn't happen here in Australia, where we end up having the pendulum go to the point where everybody says, I just got to throw out the whole lot. I think we've got to come back to the middle and saying to every government, holding them accountable, are you acting for the broadest church that exists within your country or tribe, whatever you want to call it? And hold them accountable for developing policy that actually is in the long-term interest and thinks about grandchildren plus, not 3 years or 1 year. Now, I know that electoral cycles are short and it's a difficult game. I'm not good at it. I couldn't do it. That's why we do business, because we can make a difference in business. So back to your point, I've been able to grow businesses in this country successfully.
Easier now or harder now?
Different, just different challenges. There's always been challenges, and it's just different. You just have to adapt to what is. And I'm inherently optimistic that business does adapt to whatever the situation is. We can be dissatisfied with the quality of it, but you've got to get into a bilateral conversation and express your point of view in a positive, constructive way. You've got to do it so everybody knows what your position is. Yeah, and that should be both sides of politics and the bureaucrats. And that's the right way to change policy. And you won't get everything you want, then adapt. But you've got to keep going. I mean, that's moving towards mastery.
Okay, so let's say we were lucky enough and someone over there in Canberra is listening to this and we start seeing some good foundations laid down so business can actually get on with it. Now, in terms of business, what's going to happen? Is there going to be more capital coming in through private equity investment funds because the ASX isn't growing as much as it once was? IPOs have gone almost not backwards, but gee whiz, they're a long way short of what they used to be a decade ago.
That's
so
true.
what's happening?
Well, capital's freely available, and it's just pooling in different areas, and it's going, through different channels. Still available. So there's no lack of capital. So that's the first thing, either in Australia, in the United States, globally. Capital's everywhere.
I can get it?
You can get it. Anyone can get it.
Cost
Not hard.
and costs?
Well, you may not want to go and list on the ASX, because there's a set of, rules and prescriptive behaviours there. But private capital is growing and available, and it focuses on very specific risks. Back to risk.
Okay.
Private capital is very good at looking at the specific risks of the businesses it invests in, because it's often paid a high price to get into that asset, and it has to leverage up in order to get its returns, and it has to be extremely disciplined. So its governance is quite prescribed, and I'm talking about REM structures, for example. Yeah. And REM structures are far more flexible in the private world. And so you can then attract the right kind of people. You can share the upsides. And
you don't perform, you share the downsides.
Share the downsides, exactly.
Yep.
And yet, when you look at some of the prescriptive ways in which capital is told to act when it, is a public company, and the political pressure that comes on, it's your front page, and you're going to get. But if it's private capital, you've got a lot more flexibility, not to do the wrong thing. You've got to come back to what's your social value add, for example, measure it, contribute to society, do all the right things, but you can get on with life. So these changes are not, by the way, private capital as a percentage of the total of, world equity markets is the number of companies that are private over 100 million. In the US is roughly 80, a bit higher. In Europe, it's roughly 96%. In Australia, it's above 75%, depending on whose numbers you use. Yeah. Private is the game, and it will continue to grow, and capital will continue to flow to it. So it isn't an either-or. It's only an either-or if you're a broker and you're worried about, I haven't got enough stock. But if you're actually a business person, you go, how good is this? Freedom of capital from all these capital sources. I can get it from the public markets. I can get it from, the equity markets or the debt markets. I can get it from firms that want to invest with me long term. And actually what it is about is the discipline of match funding your assets and your liabilities. And that's where we've got to, again, come back to risk. If you match fund your assets and your liabilities, you've got a lot lower risk than if you've got a short-term funding and a long-term lending. Yep. That's dangerous.
The leadership in a listed company versus the leadership
in a private company.
Yeah. Different drivers.
I don't think the values are any different, right? Or the purpose. So, our purpose at Ventia is to make infrastructure work for our communities. I totally believe that's a noble purpose and believe in it.
Yep.
It doesn't change whether I'm public or private. What does change is the people to whom I'm accountable to. So in a public company scenario, very broad, got to answer to a lot of people. They've all got different interests. None of them are very aligned, and they're very self-interested, I might add. When we were a private company, I spoke to two people. I had two directors on my board, one representing one shareholder, one representing the other, and they remembered everything that we'd ever talked about. So it wasn't a case of going back and re-prosecuting the argument. The CEO didn't have to spend huge amounts of time, justifying things that were often driven by local politics or local nuance. They could actually concentrate on where long-term value was going to be created. So I think the quality of the conversations is a little bit different in those two environments. Yeah. I also think, you've got a different dynamic in the way you have to make your board, for example. Correct. Versus the options you've got when you're a private company.
Well, the composition's so different.
Well, it is, and it.
And the skill
if you look at it, if you look at what you put on a private company board, it is deeply experienced, industry-specific people. That's not so fashionable in the public company world. But when you look at where the outcomes are occurring in terms of where you're getting value, growth, creation of employment.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a good example about where you've got to think about these two models. So you can't be screaming about private credit's a bad thing, for example, and we should be regulating it. Yep. if you're sitting over here setting a set of rules that are just not fit for purpose for actually innovation. So I think there's some things to think about in terms of those governance frameworks in Australia to get better outcomes.
Thanks for watching the No Limitations podcast, brought to you by Blenheim Partners, board and executive search firm. As a trusted advisor, we work with Australian listed groups, multinational corporations, large private companies, and social impact organisations on their most critical people choices to drive change, prepare for growth, and outperform their peers. To learn more about Blenheim Partners and executive search, visit our website, blenheimpartners.com. And now, back to the show. There's going to be a bit of a rethink in terms of the ASX listed organisations, the way that we encourage them to make their decisions, the way we can structure those boards.
Yeah, I do. I think there's a move back to deeply experienced directors that have operational experience and you've got to be, as a director, you're not being the executive. You step back. So you've got to have people.
You've got to have an understanding of the actual business itself or the industry itself.
You've got to understand it.
Well, come on, if we go past ASX 50, you start looking at some of the pedigrees in the boardroom.
Well, that's a whole thing that shareholders should be saying. What about performance?
Why aren't they?
Well, they've got choice. See, you'd think
but the instos aren't saying enough, are they?
They don't have. All they have to do is they just say that one's not before. No, well, they say sell, and they'll go over here. So the bigger issue, they've got liquidity. So it isn't about that. It's actually about each of the boards sitting and looking at themselves and saying, what is my skills matrix? What is the competencies I need to face the future, to grow? Yep. Am I growing? Do I have an aspiration of growing EPS at double digit? If you look through the last 30 years, it's been quite low.
It's very much so.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but look at the S&P 500 last 30 years, quite high.
Yep.
Very different. I wonder why.
Yep.
So
different backgrounds on those boards, different backgrounds on those leaders.
Yeah. And look, there have been
different compensation structures as well.
Correct. Those things matter.
Yeah.
But if you come back to it, these are all fixable problems. They're not, and you don't even need regulation to do it. You just need the right attitude, which is, we need to value deep experience in the sector that you are running, and I'm going to find more of those people, which may mean that a whole lot of people who are currently doing those kind of jobs don't fit anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, because you might get better performance if you've got people who are closer to the risks of the business, the opportunities of the business, can help create and sponsor and support management to better strategies to grow. So, I think private lends itself to that.
Yeah, agreed.
The only thing with that is they keep bidding up the asset prices to such a level that they can't get a return. Purchase price matters. And if you go to core philosophies, we at Apollo still believe that the philosophy of purchase price matters, i.e. value, is really important. Try and get excess return for each unit of risk and be totally aligned with your co-investors. Those strategies are just so fundamental to success. You go to, the public sphere, it's less clear. Yeah. People can buy whatever they buy. They can spend a lot of money on it. They can leverage up. They don't have to be as clear on the principles.
Well, we're actually seeing the big end of town, i.e. the large US PE funds coming in more and more, aren't we not?
Well, they
weren't here 15, 20 years ago anywhere near as active or tapping people anywhere near as much.
So that
was
should be
Apollo, was it? 15, 20 years ago?
Correct. And that's been a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, in my own experience has been fantastic with private equity. Fantastic. They have...
No downside?
Well,
what could be improved?
The performance intensity is higher than most people would like. But back to mastery, if you're up for that, it's good.
Agreed.
I'm ready to be challenged, right? I've played sport at a reasonable level.
Yep.
I've tested myself privately in adventures and things like that. Pretty risk aware, but sometimes on the higher end of the risk curve.
Yep.
And as a result, I enjoy that environment because it is about performance. Yep. And performance matters. And performance where you are aligned to the outcomes actually gets good outcomes. And that's what my experience was with private equity. And it was a good experience. Not everybody has that. Not all PE firms are the same. And the firm I'm at had to change, Apollo had to change its whole strategies because it could see that purchase price was just going up. And if its philosophy was purchase price matters, it had to look at alternatives. And today it is a vastly different business. Only, roughly 10, 12% is private equity. The rest is investment-grade private credit and retirement incomes.
Yeah.
They had to revamp their whole strategy because they could see, very well done by the leadership back in 2008, that the game was going one way. So private equity can't stay static either, is my point. You've got to keep evolving your strategies to the new world.
What about super funds? We're talking about retirement. Australian super funds are sitting on an enormous amount of capital, as we know.
Yeah.
Becoming too activist?
Too activist? I don't think so. I think they've got, they've got a point of view on things that matter and that matter to their members. And I think, some of those things are very relevant and they should prosecute those arguments. But if their fundamentally performance is not there, that's where they should be focused. Okay, the performance is not there and why? If there's egregious behaviour in the company, good that someone holds them to account. But the super funds have to get a return. And the return game has all been about growth and accumulation phase, but in the retirement phase, it's about income.
Yeah.
It's a different game. And income, they don't have balance sheets. Super funds don't have balance sheets, and most people look surprised when I say that. But
so what do you mean to the layman out
well,
there by that?
They've got a big pot of capital, but they've got no capital sitting underneath it. Unlike, my firm, for example, Apollo, they've got a big wad of, capital sitting underneath their balance sheet. And so you've got to have some way of giving a retiree a guaranteed income stream into the future. So when you look at the product set that we need for the next phase of superannuation, they're very good at investing in private assets. They do it all around the world. This is the super funds.
Yeah.
They're very concentrated in a lot of cases to public markets, which is a very big risk. I mean, 50% of our index is to some banks, some miners, and healthcare company. And we've got the Magnificent Seven. Disproportionately, the retirement systems of Australia and the US are leveraged to a very few companies.
Yeah.
That's concentration risk.
Yeah, great.
So we need to actually think about and come back to, okay, let's diversify it. But when you come back to your activist point, they have a point of view. Directors have to listen to that point of view, and they either decide yes or no. We're doing the right thing or we're not.
Hold on. Even that's a question in itself. And if we want to pull this apart, some pretty interesting boards in super funds.
Yeah, well, that's their governance rules.
It's pretty interesting, but isn't it?
But is
they financial? Is their financial acumen super strong? Or they got the pedigree in that boardroom?
I think it's obviously an issue for them as trustees, and the regulators are asking harder questions of trustees today than they ever have, and rightfully so. And there's some very big matters that are being prosecuted in the public domain at the moment that really do go to what is the role of a trustee. And so you and I, as directors of companies, we think about this. We do our due diligence and we think about our obligations and we think about the liability that comes with that. And that's a risk profile that we're prepared to take. Maybe in the past it hasn't been as focused for some of the trustees, but I know some world-class trustees. You do too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those world-class trustees, they do act in their members' best interest and they are passionate about it. And they are thinking about these big things that matter. And they're worried. They manage their own board composition. That's not, again, for you and I to do. And I don't worry about that. What I do worry about is the super fund that is my shareholder, am I representing to them what we do and where we're getting returns, and can they listen to that and actually trust that position? And if they can, they stay with you. And they're very loyal and they're very good long-term shareholders. So I'm down at the fund manager level, and what you're talking about is sitting up at the board level of a super fund. That's a governance matter, and it doesn't impact, in my judgment, where the capital of the investment manager in any super fund is actually going on a day-to-day basis. I think they act independently. I've not seen any evidence that, some composition of a board of a super fund is impacting on an investment in any of my companies. I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah, okay. All right. International experience. You've been a CEO?
Yes.
Living offshore?
Yes.
In the world of telecoms?
Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, it was a very...
Because you walked into a role where the founder had moved on.
Well, the founder was still there.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah. Ratish was there were three founders, actually, of that business. And...
So you want to tell everybody who it is?
Yes, it's called Lebara, and it was a pan-European telco, an MVNO, mobile virtual network operator. And so they had, even though it was in telecoms, that was about the only similarity between Telstra. Telstra has a big balance sheet. It has, huge cash flows, long-term customers, and it gets its money, from a very broad, enterprises, consumers, and everything in between. When you are an MVNO selling to ethnic retail stores, you are making your money at 1p a minute on hundreds and hundreds of calling routes, which have to be repriced every day. Yeah. In truth, Greg, it was a real shock to the system because I could be a CEO in a $10 billion division of Telstra, highly successful. In this one, it was completely different. We had to worry about cash 4 or 5 times a day. How do you collect from 10,000 ethnic retail stores they get the money before we do?
That's right.
They collect it in advance.
So I'm going to buy my Liberty card.
Correct. So they get the money first. Yep. It doesn't come to our bank account. We have to go and get it from all of those. So your collection challenge was different. Ratish, in my judgment, the founder, was an absolute genius. And he saw a market need, which was low-cost calling for ethnic communities globally. And he met that need. It wasn't met up until then. And he bought wholesale time from telecoms companies and he resold it, and he had to make a profit for people who are very, very finely attuned to the last cent.
Yeah, very much so.
And so it was a very, very big, cultural shift for me. But what a great experience.
Okay, so you'd come from previously?
Well, I'd been at Telstra as a senior executive for a decade. I'd been at GE for a decade before that. Yep. I had my own business before that, and I'd been in the steel sector before that. So, and then financial services before that. So I had a lot of experience. Yep. But here I was in a different geography, dealing with a lot different, scenarios. Great learning experience.
What did you learn?
Oh, massive curiosity. I learnt that I had to focus on where I could add value to that system, and it wasn't in all of the things that I'd been good at over here. It was actually looking at where the risks arose in that business, where fraud risk arose, where the time to cash arose, and actually helping to solve those problems so you got much more consistent business outcomes from the business, which ultimately got sold. They made a lot of money, and to their credit, the money a big chunk of the money went into a foundation for ethnic kids in Sri Lanka and southern India. And that was part of our compact when I took the job. I said, I don't just want to do this as a money-making thing. I'd like to do it as a for-purpose thing. And that was great alignment with the founder. So what we did have is we had alignment about stuff that mattered to us personally. But it was a terrific experience watching such an incredibly intelligent, thoughtful guy who knew pretty much and had set up the entire 10,000 plus ethnic distribution, knew them personally. To me, coming in as a CEO, fresh off having...
So why did he give you the gig?
I think it was that alignment, actually. And I think he probably was intrigued about a different level of, skills, and he wanted to professionalise the company. There was also a need for greater government compliance. Regulatory barriers were going up. I'd had a good track record of managing in a complex regulatory environments. And so I think he saw, look, these are plus. And we worked together very effectively. He was the chair, but he was an active chair, and it was still privately owned. Yeah. So it was more like an exec chair. Well, he was an exec chair without question. And the other 2 founders were in the business as well. So it was, look, what a learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
How good was that?
How good was it at GE?
Oh, fantastic. What an experience. I mean, I was there at the best time in GE's history in its lifetime.
What, under Jack? Under
Jack, yeah. And a profoundly powerful and thoughtful and probably the best, business leader of his time. Often maligned, in my judgment, very unfairly in a lot of cases, but that's what, history gets rewritten, as they say. But my experience was profoundly good at GE. It stretched me. He stretched me personally. It was fabulous for Australia. We redefined non-bank financial, lending in the country. Yeah. We energised a generation of leaders. Greg, in that framework. These are
So
people
how do you
that
do
have
that?
gone.
Go on. Gee, he's got an enormous culture to start with.
Yeah.
So when Jack comes and sits down with you and he said he took an interest in you,
Yeah.
well, what was that like?
Well, it was, I was a bit overwhelmed, quite frankly, because, grew up in Armidale, New South Wales, and to be dealing with the guy who was the CEO of the, largest market cap company in the world was, I thought, well, this is different. And he held me to account in ways that few could because he knew exactly what I was capable of as a leader and what I wasn't. But he always set
Pretty
the
fascinating.
roadmap to the next stage of development. And he did that we grew the business here. We started with a single transaction, which was the acquisition of Coles Myers credit card business.
Oh, yeah.
And then we built that. We acquired Nissan Finance. We ended up buying AGC and all these other, entities and HFC and putting it together into a fabulous business. And then eventually Genworth, the insurance company, which I think we acquired for $8 million and it got sold for $1 billion. So there was huge value creation.
$8 million sold for $1 billion.
Well, when it eventually market capped a long time later. So there was obviously investment that went on along the way. But the point is that Jack, what I think sold him was I went to him with a vision for Australia through the GE Capital leadership and said, I think we can build a mini GE Capital in Australia. And I believe we can get to 100 million of net income in Australia. And here's how I think we can do it. And he said, well, I don't believe you and I don't think you can do that, but why don't you go and have a go? And at that point in time, I thought, I'm going to have a go. And I didn't have anything better to do. I was moving from the US back to Australia. And so when I got back here, that opportunity was before me, but I had the huge capacity of the GE masters in their game at the time. And GE Capital was a very well-run business. What brought it unstuck later, after I'd left and after Jack had left, was actually a mismatch of liabilities and assets. One was funding short and lending long. Jack would never have made that mistake, in my judgment, nor Gary Wendt or the leadership of GE Capital at the time. They would never have made that mistake. So there was a cultural slip that occurred after his time towards mastery and excellence about risk management that cannot be held accountable to him.
So what sort of questions would he ask you when you're sitting down together and reviewing your performance?
Well, it was more that we went to him for deals, right?
Okay.
And so every deal was different, and he would often challenge you right out of the box, like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Why should I waste my time and our money? And so with that, you had a choice to make, right? You could say, oh, you're right, I think I'll leave, or Jack, you're wrong, and I think I'll demonstrate. And he would push you and push you and push you, sometimes up to 30, 40 minutes. And then he would say, okay, yes or no. No, not just him. He would take advice from other people, yes or no. And if you got to yes, he was testing you and he was putting the 100% on you. Are you going to take the money of this company and are you going to invest it? And I've told you where the risks are and you've told me that you've got them covered. I'm now satisfied that you've answered my questions. You can have the money. That kind of framework is really powerful in leadership development because I came back with the money sometimes, one particular case, and he was right and I was wrong. I should never have done that deal. I spent 2 years digging it out of a hole and almost didn't get there, but we got our money back in the end. But my goodness, my pride was on the line for that. And that was the kind of leader he was. Extraordinary.
Accountability?
Accountability. Total accountability.
You're now chair. What do you look for in leaders?
Well, I look for alignment to the values and the purpose of the business. I look for deep operational experience in the sector that we're in and understanding of where the risks arise and a capacity to actually mobilize people. And that's an intrinsic, it's a touchy-feely type thing. Yeah. But it's the capacity to energize others, not through showmanship or that, but actually through discipline, by having systems that reward good behaviour, systems that can call out where you've got variation within processes and risk and where that's emerging, the capacity to coach and develop, And I've had, we've got a fabulous CEO in Dean Banks at Ventia. And I am so pleased to have had the opportunity to work with him now since 2001. And I have seen those behaviours and those characteristics in his leadership style. And the company's been incredibly successful. It's grown very well under his leadership, and he's amassed a great team of people. And he continues to drive every day for world-class performance, for the right things, alignment with our purpose and our values. And that's what I look for in a leader.
Yeah, okay. And in the boardroom, the actual board directors, what do you look for in that now? Has that changed much?
Well, for me, it's always been about competency in the field that we are running. So if you look at the composition of my board, it's an interesting story. When the three brokers, they don't need to be named, we were going to market, I said, I've now narrowed down the selection of the directors. And they said, look, the market doesn't understand who any of those are. And I said, yes, but they understand our business. So I'll take a risk on them, because while they are not necessarily super high profile, they actually understand the business we're in, and they all bring a little different something to our board and our committees that they each lead. And as a result, I'm backing those directors to add value to our executive, and me as the chair to pull that together as a team and create alignment, and it's worked. And so that was a good example about the IPO process. Would have said, why don't you go and get these names?
Don't get the big name. Don't get the big name, yeah.
And that was the conversation. It was, look, you haven't got enough of those.
We need to get this over the line. We want to get it up going fast.
Correct. And the approach, again, back to PE ownership.
It's an interesting call.
It was the right call. And I'm absolutely delighted with the quality of the board I've got. They have contributed exactly as I'd hoped. In fact, they have exceeded expectations. And as a result, we've got a tremendous working relationship between the board and the CEO and the executive leadership team, and the company's performing, Greg.
Do we have the actual, in terms of the board functionality, do we have it right here in Australia? We have an awful lot of meetings compared to, say, what Americans do and what the UK does.
We have 6 meetings a year,
okay,
and 2 are for approving. That's
probably half as much as everybody else.
2 are for approving the accounts, and that's audit and risk, very, very process driven.
Absolutely.
And at each board meeting, what we do is we run our committee meetings, usually the day before, and each of my directors chairs a single committee, but each director is invited to attend, if they want to, the committee meetings, and they all do. And that's quite good, because then the debate can happen in the room, they can listen to it, and then when we get to the board meeting, we've all got the same level of information. And that's been something that I didn't expect to happen, but just came out of the natural alignment. Okay. And as a result, we've got an operating cycle too. So we know what's happening in each quarter, where we're focused. We dial up the focus on, compliance and risk. We dial up the focus on strategy. We dial up the focus on budget and performance. We dial up the focus on people and capability against our strategy. So that cycle means that the whole company knows what's coming, and we can often park issues and move them around and get them to the right place you don't have to deal with everything immediately. And as a result, you get a lot of rhythm that works quite well. So all of these things don't necessarily take a lot of time. We do, if we've got tenders, there's obviously a DOA, and we do meet for those tenders, but they can be short and sharp meetings that are very relevant to the risk profile that we're looking at. And then we would involve the directors for the business development committee, for example, in that. So you can make this stuff work, Greg. It's teamwork. It's not being at the centre of the game. I'm the chair, but I'm really the facilitator. Yeah. I hope I'm a coach for the CEO and the executive leadership team. My board are coaches for the executive leadership team, deep engagement, and that gives them line of sight to what's going on. And we have a tremendously open dialogue with the CEO. It's peer-to-peer. It's all part of the one team. It's totally transparent. And as a result, we can do our jobs well as directors.
So what's the future for Ventia?
Well, I'm excited about the future. We serve a $100 billion market here in Australia and New Zealand. We don't have to, venture offshore or do anything, dramatic. We do more of what we're doing. We're adopting AI and driving productivity in terms of client outcomes, i.e. more data analysed in a better way that allows them to do better things with their budgets. So that's when I say productivity, it's not about just, and we're trying to make people's jobs more interesting. So as I look to the future, I think we've got, a tremendous opportunity. There is a huge need within the public sector for greater efficiency, and we can bring that. We don't have a balance sheet, so we're capital light, so we tend to just be a services, and we are also, very important in emergencies, whether it's natural emergencies or other things, because we run these big centres called the VOC, we call it, which is the Ventia Operations Centre, and it can monitor what's going on, for example, across Telstra's exchanges or the NBN network. We work with our clients for when natural disasters, and we try to offer those services in a way that is a backup to them. So I can't see that getting less as a modus operandi into the future. Only more.
And you discussed defence early days.
Yes.
What's that going to be to you?
Well, defence is hugely important to us. We have been recently retained on some of the geographies that for very large contracts, nearing $3 billion for management of those bases, and those include Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and here in Victoria, for example, Tassie. And so as a result of that, we are going to be very much part of making sure that the defence personnel have a great on-base experience. It's maintaining the assets there, and it's supporting those people with great experiences. So we've got a long-term role with defence, and we are very, very proud of what that means for sustaining the human condition on those bases as those people are called to action in due course. And of course, in Western Australia, it's Henderson, which is where the big investment's going to be in submarines, either maintenance or build in due course. It's in the Northern Territory. That's the frontier where, if something's going to happen, it most likely will happen there, and where the big US forces are based. Yep. So, look, defence is a hugely important customer for us, but we have to keep going to them with value. We have to demonstrate that we can support them in future operations, not just current operations. And I'm very, very proud of our defence team and their engagement and what it means for our nation, Greg.
Okay. Apollo, let's take it something different. Does everybody know what Apollo is?
Well, Apollo's a very large US, New York listed alternative asset manager, and what that means is that they essentially invest their capital and their partners' capital into real assets. And real assets are things like infrastructure, energy transition, data centres, things that matter, that drive the economy. They focus on investment grade, and that is very different to some of the private credit sort of houses, if you like, because alternative asset management is about managing private credit investment. And because their genesis was in private equity, they had a very good core skill set in leading and running companies, understanding risk, pricing risk effectively. So now when they invest in investment grade private credit, what they are doing is, for example, Intel. Intel recently did a very large wafer manufacturing facility, and we funded half of that. Now, there's $11 billion.
Is that right?
Half of that. $11 billion investment as a single investment. And it was a long-term, facility for them, but it is getting a return over and above their benchmark cost of capital that if we'd gone out and bought their public bonds would be hundreds of basis points lower than what we actually got, because we could offer a very structured solution. So Apollo is investing in the real economy, it's facilitating it, and it is providing, more recently, its capital has come from retirees in the US. We're the largest annuity provider, for example, in the US. And we have regulated insurance balance sheets. And as a result of that, we're going and investing in real assets, not just in the US, but around the world, in things that matter to the growth of the economy. And we're giving those excess returns back to our retirees in the form of income that guarantees their retirement so they can plan with some degree of confidence. So it's a fabulous organisation. The leadership are incredibly values-based, and Apollo were my private equity investor, one of the investors in the Ventia business, and that's where the association started. And then after we got going with that and they exited and did very well out of that investment, they asked me to consider chairing. And I thought, well, I really like these people. I believe in their vision. I believe investing in real assets. I think we need to do more in retirement here. This could be a really great
So what
match.
more are you going to do in retirement here?
Well, the thing is we need to now add our leadership voice based on our global experience to the Australian setting and work to getting better outcomes to prepare the system for decumulation. That is our moral responsibility, and that's what we're doing. It's not a short-term game, and everyone will benefit from this. It's not about Apollo in isolation. It's absolutely about Apollo as a member of a system, that is the retirement income system, that has things to bring. We can bring balance sheet, global balance sheet, to be able to support product here in Australia that Australian retirees want, and we can give them guarantees that income will be indexed to things like inflation, healthcare costs, and education costs, for example. These products don't exist at the moment, but that's what our thematic is. And we're $4.2 trillion at the moment as a capital pool. It's going to be, 2x that over our lifetimes, Greg. And so if I can help Apollo be positioned to be a contributor to that system and help with policy development that is in the best interest of Australian retirees and capital flows within this country, I've done something that fits with my own,
So
personal
how far down
values.
the journey are you on that one?
Oh, it's early. It's early. It's a big system. There's a lot of things to be considered. There's policy things. There's regulatory things. There's cultural things. But why not do something interesting?
No, I agree with you.
And my philosophy in life is do interesting things with interesting people and add value. And if at the end of the day...
It's going to change the dial?
I believe so. I believe it has the potential to change the dial, and I have the will to continue to stick with it and work with the system in a very open and transparent way for better outcomes. And there's very smart people in this industry, in all parts of it. And we can bandy together, and in my judgment, there's a lot of good that's going to come from this. Great things for capital in this country.
What could we learn as business people from the Americans then? I mean, you're every day of the week, you're chairman of AmCham. What could we take on board and learn?
Yeah, well, my experience has always been that they're really, really good at risk management, and they're really good at seeing, and differentiating to fill a market need. Now, Australians can do this too, right? And there's so many examples of companies that have done that. It's not a unique thing to the US, but I did find that their balance of where they understand that good compliance enables growth. We sometimes as Australians rally against compliance. We go, we don't need that. We're always doing the right thing, right? But in truth, they just say, well, that's the rules. Let's get on with it. And now let's live within the rules and let's look for what is value add, where we can add value, and then let's go and attract people to that vision and that alignment. So my experience with US business is the energy and the confidence that comes from great systems that underpin those businesses. And as a result of that, I invest in core systems first and the people that can then operate those. The vision doesn't have to be something that we're all sort of shouting from the rooftops back to the early part of the conversation. Yeah. It's actually, let's just improve everything. Let's just improve everything we do. And in doing that, let's make sure that where we are adding value, there is a niche there that we're actually serving and we're pricing it correctly. We're not just, buying business, for example. And I think the very good US businesses do that incredibly well. And let's face it, there's a huge flow of people going back and forth from Australia to US and not just there, to European businesses, to Asian businesses. And that's where we are getting the best of everything and we can see it. We should just be harnessing it. And I think there are examples where that's happening.
Is it hard to do business in the US, being an Australian company?
Oh, well.
We saw an example last night where they've done very well, but there's been a lot of companies haven't made it.
Look, all beauty is in the detail and all risk is in the detail. Okay. And if you don't get in, if you think it looks and smells and sounds just like Australia, you'll fail. And I think that's where the gap has been in the past. The US is different. They have a different language. They have a different, system for doing things. They have different motivations. when you get into it, it looks and feels just like us, and it's absolutely not. It's fundamentally different. That's a leadership failure, and there you've got to get in and say, okay, I truly understand what I have bought, and it doesn't look like my business here. It actually is a fundamentally different business, and I think it's a very high bar that any Australian company should be buying a global business anywhere, because if their assumption is it just looks like us, they're probably going to fail.
Okay. Personal risk, professional risk.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I'm probably at the higher end of the risk tolerance curve. I've done some interesting things in a personal sense. I've paddled my sea kayak to New Guinea. I've paddled my sea kayak down to Tasmania.
Yeah.
Not many people have done that. I did that. The one to New Guinea was for my 50th birthday, and I did that with a couple of mates. And we also did a mountain bike ride from just north of Cooktown to the tip of Cape York. It was 1,000 kilometres off road. And then we slept on the ground, and then 200 kilometres a day, roughly, a little bit less. And then we got in sea kayaks and did, roughly 100 kilometres a day to New Guinea, and then we ran Kokoda at the end of it. And that was at 40 hours. And so we did that in 10 days end to end. So that type of thing is not what everyone wants to do or is capable of doing. And I have fortunate that I know some people who are very good at risk management, and we were able to manage some complex risks about that. Not just the physical risk, the equipment risks, the risk being on the open ocean at night with sharks and crocodiles. Yeah. And so we went about thinking through that in a risk-based way. And when we were all satisfied that, we can manage the risk, we did it. And guess what? And it was a fundraiser for a charity, the Lost Battlefield Trust in that case. Yeah. And so that kind of thing is, I appreciate that's not for everybody, but I quite enjoy testing myself in those kind of environments because I learn a little bit about myself for sure. Yeah. I learn a lot about trust and systems, and I learn a lot about risk. So that's an example that when I look at it, I've been able to survive all of these things, thankfully intact and still enjoying being physically fit at a tender age of 65. So I think those things can be instructional in your business life. They can help you with resilience. They can help you with trust. They can help you with judgment in the moment when things go wrong, and they always do. Yep. So those are some of the things that I've enjoyed doing as an individual, but hopefully with a purpose as well.
What's next for David?
More of the same. I'm very happy with the contribution that I can make in the businesses I'm involved in. I've just been elected recently to another 3 years at Ventia, yep. And I'm really enjoying supporting Apollo in their very big and important work around retirement incomes here in Australia. AmCham is a most consequential organisation in keeping the fabric through the political cycles together. 600 plus members, more than $1 trillion of bilateral investment, massive innovation partnerships, and we input into policy. I'm really enjoying that work. We've got a fabulous CEO, April Pumelly, absolutely outstanding leader. And so, I've been the most fortunate guy in the world, Greg. I'm always remember my start, which is I'm reminded of George P. Schultz's, lovely phrase, "My parents loved me and I knew it." I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and it started there. And along the way, there's been this opportunity to reach and to stretch and to test and to seek mastery. I'm still going.
Well, my last question is going to be then, if you're looking back at the young bloke growing up in Armidale all these years later, what advice would you give him now?
I would say you cannot predict the future. You are not in control. Adapt. Be alert. Understand your values. Trust. And look for the truth in everything.
All right, David, thanks very much for today. It's been a great show.
Thanks, Greg.
You've been listening to No Limitations.